Hey, good Friday morning, everybody. Here we are. We made it through another week, and we get to wind it up with the best medicine that we can to get our day started off right, and that's a dose of God's Word. This morning, I want to look at a couple of passages over what the wise man wrote over in the book of Proverbs. The Proverbs is kind of known as that book for daily living. And it just got a whole variety of just different topics that we may face in life. There's a lot of things in here about the tongue and about what we say and how we say it and so on and so forth. But that's not what we want to talk about this morning for a few moments. I want to look at a couple a couple of verses here in Proverbs chapter 15. And here's a couple of verses, specifically verses 8 and 9, that I think we really need to maybe kind of understand, especially, for religious people. Solomon writes this. He says, Proverbs 15 and in verse 8, he says, "The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. The way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but he who loves him follows righteousness." Here Solomon breaks down for us, there's two categories of people, the wicked and the righteous. And it's very interesting of what he says in verse 8. He's talking about sacrifice or worship. But he says that there can be wicked people that are worshiping God. How so? I find this very intriguing, and this is what I find so very important for us to really kind of stop and think about. Jesus spoke over Matthew 15, verses 8 and 9, and Mark's account, Mark chapter 7, verses 7 through 9, that whole context there. He says, "These people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, for they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men." They worship in vain. Here's people religious. Here's people in the synagogue. Here's people in the temple. They're acknowledging God. They're, in their mind, they are worshiping God. But Jesus said it's all in vain. As to Solomon's point here, it's wicked, which kind of goes to show, even back here in the Old Testament, there were ordinances, and the Hebrew writer talks about that in Hebrews 9, Hebrews 10, is that there's even the first covenant had ordinances of divine worship, meaning there was a very prescribed and detailed way on how, when, and what was going to be involved or contained, connected to that worship. So we can as well. We can come and we can worship God, but we very much, in our eye, in God's eyes, we very well could be wicked. And we may not even know that, because we think in our mind, well, I'm worshiping God, so God's got to be good. Look at just the gamut of worship in a religious world. For example, the Church of Christ don't have choirs, don't have light shows, don't have basically a rock band, and all this other kind of stuff. And then you can go all the way to the other extreme where it is light shows. You turn the lights down, you got smoke. It's basically like a rock concert. Are both right? Solomon says the sacrifice or the worship of the wicked is an abomination. We have this mindset in the religious world. Satan is very good at what he does, so to speak, right? And that we think as long as we are acknowledging something towards God, God is going to be okay with that. My friend, let me inform you on this. God has never been that way. God has never accepted anything from any one of his people that was based on their whims or desires. It has always had to be according to what God has said, along with the right attitude towards doing it. Cain and Abel is proof and point. He didn't accept Cain's offering, but he did accept Abel's. Well, why? Well, God must have told them what to offer, and also Cain's attitude was wrong within that. And so you see the point that Solomon is making here. We can worship God and yet be wicked, and the very thing that we think that we're pleasing God is an absolute abomination to him. He says, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. Well, who are the upright? Well, he goes on and he kind of clarifies that in verse 9. But the way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but he who loves him follows righteousness. Righteousness is very simply doing what's right in the sight of God. Not what's right in our eyes. So many times I hear, religious people say, well, I just don't see anything wrong with it. Well, that's the problem. You don't see something wrong with what you're doing. The question should be, does God see something wrong with the way I'm doing it? And many times the answer will come back, well, no, God doesn't see anything. Why? Because we think God accepts what we want to give to God. So many times we can have our minds so clouded and so blinded that we can't see what God really says and what God really wants, because we want to worship God the way we want to. We want to believe what we want to. We want to do what we want to. We want to live the life that we want to. And we convince ourselves that God's good with that. Let's read these two verses again. The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. The way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but he loves him who follows righteousness. We're either in one or two camps, whether we're saint or sinner, religious or not. It's got to be done God's way. End of story. Period. It has to be according to God's will. And that should be, everybody should be doing and teaching the exact same thing in the religious world. We can be religious, we can sacrifice, we can worship, and still be wicked. And what we're trying to give to God can be an absolute abomination to him. Why? Because we're not doing it his way. I'm going to leave you with that. There's your dose of God's word. This is good. This is really something really to chew on and think about. What the wise man is saying here. Proverbs chapter 15, verses 8 and 9. Let us not be wicked in the things wicked in the mind of God, in the sight of God, in the things that we do. Let's find out what he wants, when he wants it, and how he wants us to do it, so that we're not wicked and the things we are doing are not an abomination, but we're doing things in righteousness, meaning the right way or God's way. Hey, go back, think about these things. Proverbs verse 15, verses 8, 9. Go back, study and meditate upon these things and come to an understanding of what that really means. And then start making application to it in line with the Bible. Hey, I hope this will do you some good. Lord willing, we'll get back together on Monday morning. We'll get us another dose and get our week and our day started off right. Until then, I hope you have a great day. We'll see you then.